Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy has lost an appeal against his 2021 conviction for corruption and influence peddling. On Wednesday, France's highest court upheld the decision, which handed Sarkozy a 3-year prison sentence. Now, 2 of those years were suspended, and Sarkozy would be allowed to wear an electronic monitoring bracelet instead of going to prison for the last year. The court's decision today means Sarkozy will have to wear the bracelet and will be ineligible to run for office for 3 years. Sarkozy is a conservative who remains an important figure in French politics. His lawyer says he will appeal the case to the European Court of Human Rights.
De Nicolas Sarkozy vient d'être rejeté.
Nicolas Sarkozy's appeal has just been rejected by the French Supreme Court, which we consider contrary to precedents set by the European Court of Human Rights. It's the first time in France that a person has been found guilty on the sole basis of intercepted communications with his lawyer. That being the case, Nicolas Sarkozy will, as he always said he would if he was not satisfied by the decision of French judges, appeal to the European Court of Human Rights.
Devant les juges français, saisir la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme.
For more on Sarkozy's case, let's cross live to Andrew Smith. He is a historian of modern France and a lecturer in liberal arts at Queen Mary University of London. Thank you so much for being here with us. I'd like to get just your reaction to the news of Sarkozy losing his appeal over these corruption charges. Was the verdict a surprise?
Well, I think at this stage, it's not so much a surprise. It's all been about this technical ruling over whether or not this wiretapping evidence was admissible. Of course, this wiretapping evidence was all about essentially a cover-up, seemingly, about another corruption scandal. Now, what was going on is essentially between his lawyer and himself, there was a sort of discussion about whether or not they could try and find out some information and find out a little bit more about what was going on from a judge, from a senior magistrate. And the idea was that maybe if he could get a little bit of information, then he might get a sort of plum post in Monaco as a sort of kickback. And so really this is all about peddling influence and trying to kind of reward favour. But it was to do with investigating yet another corruption scandal. This kind of nested array of scandals that Sarkozy has kind of gotten himself into. So in that sense, I think it's not really a surprise. It is something which is, I guess, right. He's being punished for this corruption. It's, a signal that type of corruption isn't welcome in politics. And the hope is that, it helps clean up the what's going on a wider basis in Paris.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew, that intercepted communications with his lawyer, that's what his lawyer was saying is the basis for appealing to the European Court of Human Rights. Can you explain a little bit more why he can do this, how he can take this to the European Court?
The argument is that, first of all, these are conversations between him and his lawyer, and they should be confidential. They shouldn't be broadcast in this way as part of this. The idea is also that around when the wiretapping was happening, there was another parallel investigation about trying to flush out a mole which was going on at the same time. And so it's an argument about the actual process through which these recordings were made and whether or not they are admissible evidence of this. And so what he's going to the European Court of Human Rights about to kind of appeal this further to the High Court is around this idea of the conversation between him and his lawyer. For him, it was a sort of conversation. He was testing the ground. He was just speaking openly to a lawyer, not actually implicating himself. But of course, what the court has found is that this was evidence that there was wrongdoing going on. So it's all about this idea of whether or not a conversation with a lawyer can be listened into, whether or not that can implicate you in a wider system of corruption, and whether or not that's admissible evidence in the court.
Okay, and that's where the human rights element comes into here. What do you think that this decision could mean for Sarkozy's political future and the future of the right-wing Republican Party, which has been drastically weakened since Sarkozy was president, we should say?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it's a bad day for Sarkozy. Of course, we've got this appeal rejected for him. We know there is another corruption trial around campaign funding and the accusation of receiving Libyan funds as part of his presidential campaign, which will take place in January, just coming at the start of next year. That trial will open then. So, of course, there is more to come for Sarkozy in this sort of, kind of scandal hit presidency which he presided over. It's bad in the sense for him he is inadmissible, he's ineligible in taking part in politics. Likewise, it's a bad day for him because, of course, Bayrou, his longtime rival, who we know he doesn't get on well with, is now in the post of prime minister. So his political family is not doing well. He personally is not doing well, and it really doesn't bode well for the Républicains. We know, of course, they split in the summer when you had Eric Ciotti try to kind of move towards the far right, Rassemblement National, National Rally. We had a kind of stay true section, a kind of rump Republican Party under Laurent Wauquiez, who tried to kind of stand true to this Republican arc. So there's a real challenge around what the future of it is. Does it get swallowed up by the centre, and can it declare itself, independent from Emmanuel Macron's majority, or whether the kind of governing majority in that sense, or do they cleave closer, ever closer to the far right, and do they lose themselves there? So it's a real challenge for that political family of the Republicans to articulate some difference and find themselves a role in this very difficult political moment in France.
Mm-hmm. And for our viewers who maybe don't follow French politics as closely, have Sarkozy's legal troubles, have they made him a sort of political pariah? Are his supporters standing by him? I mean, he has been a very popular figure in France.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sarkozy hasn't really been playing an active political role. He's been in the kind of the background, as it were, a sort of impresario. And it was often seen that the future of the Republicans sort of often lay in different political figures at the head of the Republican Party, sort of courting the influence of Sarkozy and courting his kind of, advice and support. And we've even seen the kind of accusations that some like Emmanuel Macron are still interested in finding out the sort of opinions that people like Sarkozy have on current affairs. He's seen to be an influential figure who sort of revitalized the Republican Party and took it in a different direction. He's someone who is a charismatic figure as a former president, and it's really part of this lingering influence. So he hasn't been a frontline political player, but he's been a very influential player in the background of French politics, sort of, really kind of moving the chess pieces on the board, we might say, for the centre-right.
Well, like you said, this is not his only legal trouble. He will be back in court next year. If you could, please, Andrew, stay with us, because I would like to now turn to the government formation drama going on here in Paris. French President Emmanuel Macron will once again host his Prime Minister, François Bayrou, on Wednesday afternoon at the Élysée Palace. The goal is to try to move forward on the cabinet in hopes of having a government formed soon. Bayrou has only been Prime Minister for mere days, and he has made a splash, but not for the reasons he would hope. So lawmakers are outraged right now at him because he attended a Mayotte crisis meeting online Monday, then spent the rest of his evening leading a town hall meeting in the southwestern city of Pau, where he is still mayor. Then yesterday, Tuesday, he faced lawmakers in Parliament, and let's just say they were not impressed by his performance. So, Andrew Smith, anyone tuning in, historian of modern France, you're still with us. It's no surprise that the new prime minister isn't getting the warmest welcome in Parliament. But what do you make of this anger over Bayrou going to Pau and attending a town hall meeting?
Yeah, it's a real challenge. François Bayrou has tried to defend himself by saying he wants to, you shouldn't have the regions of France disconnected from power in Paris. But of course, he was, part of the kind of the part of the legislature that voted through the laws which separated this cumul des mandats, the accumulation of different posts, which essentially banned people from being kind of national political figures, from holding a national role like a deputy in the Assembly, assembly or a cabinet member or so on, or prime minister for that case, with having a local kind of municipal role, such as the mayoralty of a town. And for years, decades in French history, that's always been the case. Frequently people held these posts as the mayor of a small town and then would also be a kind of national political figure at the same time. But since the passing of that law, of course, we've seen other prime ministers, Edouard Philippe, of course, in Le Havre, Jean Castex, of course, also gave up his post as a mayor. And that was really had become the trend, had become the accepted model. Now, François Bayrou wants to kind of move back on that, wants to say actually he wants to continue working in Pau. And of course, he's been criticised because, as we heard, he phoned it in, literally joined by video call the crisis meeting. And of course, we've seen people like Yael Braun-Pivet from the Central Bloc, from Renaissance, from Macron's party, say, well, she'd much rather have seen him flying on a plane to Mayotte, trying to engage in those crisis meetings and support what's going on there, rather than flying out to Pau and holding a minute's silence, not as Prime Minister, but instead as the Mayor. That's a big challenge about judging where the kind of authority lies and where action can actually be taken. So there is a kind of slightly unusual point within this, and it really has been a very unwelcome scandal at the start of François Bayrou's prime ministerial term.
Mm-hmm. And one final question for you. Emmanuel Macron and Bayrou, they're meeting again at the Élysée Palace. Can you just shine a little bit of light on their relationship for us? Have they historically been aligned politically, and what's their relationship like now that they're having to work together to try to dig us out of a crisis?
Well, yeah, historically they've worked very closely together. Of course, François Bayrou tried to do for many years as a long-time presidential candidate for Modem, for the centrists, what Emmanuel Macron did. Essentially take some from the right of the centre-left and the left of the centre-right, as it were, to form this centrist government. In 2017, it was the making of Emmanuel Macron's presidential run when François Bayrou endorsed him as a central candidate and actually supported him and joined his team. Of course, then he joined the government as a very short-running justice minister, stepping down a month later because he faced all sorts of difficulties around legal trouble around the funding of parliamentary assistance, which was dismissed at the moment. Roughly the same thing that Marine Le Pen's being tried for at the minute as well. However, they've worked very closely together. Bayrou has often been a sort of independent figure. He refused to join the government under Gabriel Attal. And we've seen a couple of moments. We heard before he was invited to become prime minister, there were some stormy discussions which happened in which Bayrou demanded to be able not to be a sort of figurehead for a right-wing government, but have some authority. And there's been some discussion about whether or not he's been able to exercise that authority and claw back some separation of powers to put back some authority in the assembly in the formation of this government. What he's trying to do is Bayrou has met representatives from right across the spectrum, except for the far left. He's not met from France Insoumise, but he's trying to piece together what he's calling a government of the personalities, uniting people from the left and the right. He's trying to assert that independence from Emmanuel Macron, and there's really some negotiation that's got to be going on. They've met twice already. They're going to meet again today, and we know that Emmanuel Macron will be flying out on Thursday to go to Mayotte as part of that crisis response. We know they want a government in place before Christmas. We have, of course, that emergency law, which is passing through the Senate just now, which will allow and prevent a government shutdown. But nonetheless, France needs a government. France needs to be represented in the assembly by a government which can actually enact policy, which can pass a proper budget. And that's what Bayrou is trying to do today. So let's see where these discussions go with Macron today.
Can't say that enough. France needs a government. Andrew Smith, historian of modern France, thank you so much for spending part of your day with us here on France 24. We always appreciate your great analysis. Thanks so much.
Thank you.